solving problems that are really topical and that are really urgent. For example, ARV research, right? We believe that we do not see how exactly minority research solves some of the problems like sexism they have really put to the table in today's debate. Like today's debate is not about a black girl researching into ARVs and a white straight man researching into ARVs in the same continent that is Africa, right? Because in that case, we wouldn't have be having this debate at all. Today's debate is about a white straight man researching into ARVs and a black girl who's researching into misogyny that existed 50 years ago, right? On a comparative, we believe that in and of itself, already the white straight men should have their research being prioritized. Why? Because we are trying to uphold the interest of the actor in today's debate. And we feel like research that is solving current problems, for example, when cancer is an epidemic in a country, is something that we should prioritize, right? Based on the needs of the state at a particular point in time. We feel like the money that is needed for such, that is to include trials and errors, lab tests, as well as testing that actually occurs. We believe that that kind of resources are actually a lot to an extent that we cannot prioritize minority simply on the basis that they are minority, right? Moreover, we tell you that since today's debate is about the actor, right? This may look like a minority debate, but in and of itself, it is not, right? Let us take a look at the principles of democracy, right? We would rather prioritize the funding of research that solves the problem of the vast majority of the people, because those people are the ones who are responsible of putting the state in power, right? So that is to say, if majority are suffering from Ebola, right, a state has a better incentive to curtail as well as promote research towards prevention of an epidemic of such sort in the future, right? Moving on to our case speech, 3 things you're going to hear from my speech. First, how they say what are the state incentives, like I've previously alluded. Second, academic research goals, as well as the metrics of priority, right? My second speaker is going to come in and talk about how the proposition leaves the idea of competence. Second, impact analysis, as well as third, comparatives. Our stance in today's debate states that we should rather prioritize research into the most urgent and requiring cases, for example, ARV research. And we tell you that what does prioritizing really entail? We tell you that it is something that is based on what the outcome, what outcome we actually need. That is to say, we would rather prioritize X over Y. So Y is to get less. That is not to say that minorities are going to be excluded from getting funding, right? But we would rather prioritize X, right? But second and most importantly, we are going to give minority the attention they deserve, right? So we'd rather prioritize that which is actually going to give us the greatest net benefit, the greatest utility, as well as the greatest outcome, right? But what do really post-colonial states look like, right? Post-colonial states really do not have money to give willy-nilly. Why? Because they are still developing, right? And they do not have enough resources. What are their goals? 4 things. A, socio-economic needs that need to be addressed. B, independence. That is to say, they do not necessarily need to continue to depend on other states. For example, in the medical field, right? The way in we continue to see African states have their presidents being transported to India so that they get heart transplants, etc. Something that we feel in today's debate we cannot accept. Moreover, C, we believe that they are responsible for actually empowering the local people so that in and of themselves are able to explore their options, right? And moreover, we believe that lastly and most importantly, they want to set a footing on the international scale, right? So what are the major areas of research as we continue to notice? We feel like the major areas of research for these post-colonial states include A, media and technology, B, medicine, engineering, and manufacturing, right? But what does really academic research entail? We tell you 3 things. Number 1, it entails investigation into the problem or situation. Second, it entails identification of facts and opinions to assist in solving the problem. But third and most importantly, it to inform an action. Why is informing an action important? We tell you that A, it is a catalyst for change in 2 ways: culturally first, and secondly, practically. How? Inquiry into cosmos and cultural anthropology demystifies long-standing cultural myths. For example, that English is a superior language, right? And it is a symbol of superiority. Or that non-Christians, anybody who is non-Christian is practicing evil, right? Something that we see in the book paper hibiscus. But second and most importantly, it advances in the medical technology that can extend and leverage human life. Point of information clearly accepted.
You made a statement that's not prioritizing them doesn't mean that they are getting less, but then that is the status quo and they are getting less. How do you engage in this?
Okay, I'm going to engage that in my speech in a second. So what do we really see in a funding system, right? We see three things. Funding comes from taxation, exportation, and tourism. But at the center of it is research, right? Why? Because government has expenditures. Such expenditures include healthcare, education, welfare, as well as defense, right? But like I said, at the center of it, it is research, right? Responding to your POI, who is in the most unique position to conduct research that solves some of these problems and that tries to maximize on giving the state at large, that is everybody in the state, to include the minority, good healthcare, good education, good welfare, and good defense. We believe that the people who are in the most unique position to actually provide such are experts in these areas. How so? We believe that experts in these areas actually know far better, and being an expert does not mean you're part of minority or majority, right? We feel like anybody who's in the most unique position to actually give the best output is the one who's supposed to conduct this research, because at the end of the day, there's maximization of utility. Even if this was not the case, right, how would it be not ideal to have research conducted by a minority on the basis that they are not experts, but that only that they are minority, so as to speak? We believe that there is unevenness in the distribution of funds to the demographics, and this actually defies the principle of democracy, where the majority that actually put these people in power are no longer getting better representation simply because the state is now prioritizing the minority who did not contribute mostly to them being put in power. How is this problematic? A, minority is more likely to investigate minority problems and concerns overlooking majority problems. And by mere logic, we believe that majority concerns are more likely to be more because the majority in and of themselves are actually more in such a state. Moreover, we see that resources are likely to be superficially put towards assisting minority problems at the expense of majority demands, which are more or less likely to be greater, right? But third and most importantly, we believe that majority is more likely to be agitated in such a system where they know they actually put certain people in power, but those people whom they put in power are now overlooking some of the things they're actually doing. So what do we see in today's debate? We see a side that is advocating for research into sexism versus a side that is advocating for research into ARV research. We see a side that is prioritizing research into by minority versus a side that is prioritizing research that is based on competence, that is based on skill, and that is more likely to bring about the most utility. With this, we've never been more proud to oppose. Thank you.
Very grateful to first opposition speaker for the contribution. Let's have second proposition.
Please give me a minute. Okay, my name is Michelle, and I'm the second speaker for proposition. Okay, so today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be presenting some rebuttals to the points that up raised, as well as state my own point. So number one, the opposition said that majority is being overlooked when we prioritize the research of minority groups. Now, I have to disagree to this. Why? Because in fact, majority has a lot of attention in society because they get the needed and the required, because they get the required resources that they needed to in order to be able to recognize their goals and develop them. That is why they are majority. Minority, on the other hand, is not able to develop their ideas, and which can help in the development of that society because they are minority. Now, this debate is not about whether or not minority is competent enough to handle positions in society or competent enough to be able to whether minority is competent enough to be given the resources they require in order to be able to improve development.
Point of information.
I'll take it.
Okay, considering that this is an ACTA motion and the most important stakeholder in today's debate is a post-colonial state, can you show us how prioritizing research by minority groups gives one unique benefit that is ultimately exclusive to only your side of the house, that is to benefit the state?
Please, can you take that again? Can you please come again?
Can you show us one unique benefit that only exists on your side of the house when minority groups are prioritized when funding for research that is likely to benefit the actor in today's debate, which happens to be the state?
Minority groups are diverse, okay, and they constitute different ethnic groups. Therefore, by prioritizing them, you're giving them an opportunity to showcase um, their different, and then when that is achieved, they're able to present new ideas on the table, which help to progress the nation. Now, I would like to move to my point. Um, Prioritizing minority academic research done by minority groups provides a holistic identity for the state. Now, one characteristic of post-colonial states is that they struggle with national identity. They do not have an identity of their own. In these states, we see that what they normally do is they adopt the cultures of their colonial masters and they take them as their own, and they lack a sense of identity. Now, by prioritizing academic research done by minority groups, what happens is that we bring their views on the table and we bring their differences, as I said before, of their we bring their differences on the table, thereby allowing them to be able to thereby creating a balance in society. Now, most majority groups are considered to be dominant, and um, um, majority groups constitute the dominant people in society. And so by presenting the ideas brought by the minority groups, we help to create a balance in the society, progressing, thereby leading to progression. And we also find out that most leaders that are elected in these minority groups are found to be from the dominant groups. Thereby, so we allow the so when we fund academic research done by the minority groups, we are able to bring their views on the table and allow them to contribute um, what they have. So we are considering this as the minority groups are not being properly exploited, like their abilities and their potentials are not being properly exploited. So um, when they're allowed to when they're allowed to voice out their views, it provides a balance. And now the government will be able to will be able to merge the different cultures of the minority groups to form a single one, thereby promoting integration in the society. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
So from the beginning of his speech, he tells you that the counterfactual that should prioritize individuals who have skills who are more likely going to impact within the development of the post-colonial state. So in the worst case scenario in our world, we still show you how we can get this type of ethnic identity that you want. Show us exactly how you don't get that in our world and is exclusive to your world. You haven't proven that yet.
Well, so in our world, we are saying that the ethnic identity of the people it comes into existence when the um, the I'm sorry, please can you give me a minute?
Speaker, are you still here?
Yes, please, I'll like to end
Pardon?
my speech now.
All right, thank you so much. Let me stop my timer. We are deeply grateful to second opposition speaker for their contribution to this debate. Let's have second opposition to continue opposition substantives.
Okay, before I start, I'd just like to check that I'm fully audible and visible for everyone.
Yep.
Okay, cool. With that being said, I'll just set up my timer as well in the chat. I hope that's okay. Okay, I'll be starting my in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the whole of proposition's case is not exclusive. It doesn't show us any kind of exclusive benefits, nor does it show us any kind of linkage to all of their benefits as to what the motion actually states. Today in this debate, we're going to show you why our side has exclusive benefits that also are there on proposition side. We're going to tell you how on our side, we better value the state. We better value these minorities that they're trying to protect. And we better value not only what the state wants, what the minority wants, but what is better as a whole in the grand scheme, even on the international realm. And this is what me as second speaker is going to be talking about. So firstly, obviously, I'm going to get into a few reputations of side props case. And then secondly, I'm going to then further elaborate on the points my speaker brought up of the goals of the actual state and how we better fulfill these goals. Not only that, I'm also going to then further on elaborate on how this policy then ignores the whole ideology of competence and why this is so detrimental and why this is something that we cannot stand for. And so that being said, just a few rebuttals. So firstly, they talk about development because there's going to be understanding between the majority and minority groups. We think something that they haven't actually connected to the actual research papers. We think that this is something that can actually happen outside of their world, something that actually even happens on our world and happens at a better extent. And this is something we're going to prove. But secondly, they don't actually show us any exclusive benefit. Why this is something that can only happen if academic research is funded and prioritized. We see that this is something that can happen in other ways such as things like adding quotas in government. There are other ways that we can include better understanding between these two groups. But secondly, they talk about discrimination. They talk about xenophobia. We see that xenophobia stems from majority hating on minority because minority is probably getting advantages that they should not be getting. We see that this one is actually more likely to happen on their side. This discrimination is more likely to happen on their side. Why? Because majority, and as much as they may say majority won't be overlooked, we tell you that these post-colonial states are states with limited amount of money. If they prioritize one project, they're not going to prioritize one project and then prioritize another project. They're going to prioritize a certain amount of projects. And if those amount of projects are minority projects, then the majority is obviously going to be overlooked because the government doesn't have enough money to just be spending everywhere and anywhere. And so we say that our side, we actually better cater for discrimination is something we're going to even furthermore elaborate. And lastly, my speaker asked the POI. They said show us the exclusive benefit, and all they said was it helps minorities it represents minorities more, and that they can be able to put in their ideologies into how the country works. They can be able to present their research, and this helps the country develop. We say this is something that also exists on our side. As our country prop says, we are not saying we're not going to fund minorities. We're still, but we're only going to fund them based on their competence and based on their ability and based on their potential to be able to help this nation, rather than funding them based on the fact that they're mere minorities. And we see on our side of the house, this is a benefit that also exists, but even furthermore, on their side of the house, this is something that is less likely to happen and something that is less likely to be positive. Because if a minority is presenting research that is subpar just because they're minority, no one is actually going to take them seriously. And so we see that if we are making minorities present this research because they deserve it, people are more likely to listen, and so they're more likely to be more represented in our side of the house. And so now into argumentation. So first of all, how exactly does this ignore competence? It's quite obvious. When you say you're prioritizing these minorities, we see that because the government doesn't have that much money, when they prioritize a certain group, this means that most of the money is probably going to that. These academic researchers require a lot of money from testing and all of that. And so we see that if we are now giving people money just because they are minority, this doesn't improve anything, and this doesn't actually fulfill any of the goals. This actually doesn't do much as side affirmative as proving to you. They're telling you all these things that it may do, but all these benefits actually aren't even exclusive to their side, and all these benefits can come along by doing other things that don't involve spending government's money on things that are actually not going to help this thing. And so we're going to show you how exactly we achieve those goals. So one of the goals that we think we achieve is the international recognition. This is something that my first speaker touched on. He told us that these post-colonial states look for this international recognition. So how do we do that better on our side? And how is that something that is done worse on their side? We see that first, minorities, they only represent the minority part of the country. And so we see that when they then go into the international realm isn't going to see the whole country as a whole, as what the country stands for as a whole, but it's going to see the minority and what the minority stands for. And this is not a fair representation of the whole country. But even furthermore, we see that we are more likely to get better representation when we are finding people based off of their competence. We see that if academic research is to a standard of excellence, people are more likely to listen to the academic research brought about by a country. As a result of this, we see that people are actually more likely, investors are more likely to come into the country and invest in the country. And so as a result of this, we see that the government will then have more money and be able to fund minorities, to help minorities in order for them to gain that competence that they need, to encourage them to then do research that is going to be up to an excellent standard. Whereas on this side of the house, we have minorities whose research is probably not to the excellent standard that we need for us to get proper international recognition. And so in the whole run, we see that the kind of representation that we get internationally is a representation that we won't be proud of, because it is based off of the mere fact that you're part of a specific group of people, rather than that you're competent, rather than on the fact that you have produced an excellent research paper. And we see that this is something that we are more likely to want to value as side non-affirmative. But on analysis, we see that this could actually cause more tension. They say that they're going to have less discrimination. We see that's actually not true. We see that it's going to cause more tension. We see that because these minorities are probably going to be releasing papers that are not going to be able to help the majority as a whole, but still, going to be using a lot of money into research papers that are not probably going to help the majority. We see that there's a high probability that the majority is then going to cause backlash not only to the government, but also to these same minorities that we are trying to protect. So as a whole, the whole image of these minorities is then hindered by this policy that they claim is supposed to help them. Before I continue, I'll take a POI. Bye.
For what reason are people more likely to listen to the majority?
That's not what we're saying. People are more likely to listen to the majority. They're more likely to listen to someone who's making sense. And so that's our counter prop. That's actually something that has been run through this debate. For some reason, they believe that people with the more ability are the majority, which is their side of the issue. And they seem to believe that people with the better skill are the majority. This is actually something that is counterintuitive to what they're saying. We're saying that people with more skill, whether you be minority or majority, we are willing to fund you as long as the research you are doing, first of all, is of a high standard and it's something that's actually going to help the country as a whole. And so we're not talking about majority or minority. We're talking about these states. We're talking about funding because of skill, not funding because of what type of group you're in. And hence, we see that your side of the house actually increases discrimination rather than our side of the house. So when we're talking about increasing tensions, we see a high probability that now the minority group will be now seen as a really bad actor. And even furthermore, there's going to be a lot of tension caused between the majority and minority groups. Not only that, in general, people are now going to have an agenda against these minority groups, therefore making life harder for them. And in a post-colonial state where you really don't want any tension, where you want people to be united, this is the last thing that you're going to want. Hence, we even better more have in mind the goal of the socioeconomic success of these states, and hence we better uphold the needs for these states. And so a comparative kind of analysis and an impacting of the analysis. So first of all, who is better for the state? We have showed you how on our side of the house, we actually do better at achieving the goals of the state, while on their side of the house, they actually don't have any exclusive benefits that they can prove to us. On our side of the house, we fund based on skill. And because we fund based on skill, we make sure that we have the best research papers being released from the state. We have the best kind of investors coming into the state because of the good research papers, rather than research papers done by people, minorities. And so we see that we are better for the state as a whole, but secondly, we are better for the minorities. Why? We see that when we fund people because of their excellence, because of the kind of skill that they have, minorities are more likely to then come up with high skilled papers, and so more likely to be funded. And so when that funding comes in and those research papers are released, their ideas are more likely to be taken seriously because people see the excellence of these papers and see that they're being funded because they're excellent, not funded just because they're minorities. And so outside of the house, we even get more funding internationally so we can help those minorities and encourage them to do these research papers on my first speaker stadium. And with that, we have literally proud to stand for a motion, to stand against a motion that stands for things like discrimination, even though it claims to have no discrimination in it. With that, we've never been proud to oppose it.
All right. We are deeply grateful to second opposition for their contribution to the debate. Let's then have third proposition to whip proposition's case.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, so I'll be beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Side opposition begins this debate by talking about how they as a side propagate for funding of majorities. We get that from the first speech. We get that from the second. We get that from the first speech. Now, then later, the second speech comes to talk about the fact that it is not about prioritizing majority, but then it's about prioritizing or funding because of skill. But then the motion is in the past tense, meaning that these minorities already have the capacity to conduct these researches to begin with. So it shouldn't even be a question of skill, because the motion clearly states that the minorities already have the skills to be able to conduct this academic research. I read the motion again. This House, as a post-colonial state, will prioritize funding academic research conducted by minorities, meaning these academic researches have already been conducted by these minorities, and the need is just for funding. We as a side show you why the minorities should be prioritized over the dominant group in the country. Now, they start and they talk about how they want us to give one unique benefit that exists exclusively on our side. Well, we didn't just give you one, we didn't just give you two, but we gave you three. But then what were our arguments? We talk about the fact that on our side, there's sustainable development. On our side, it enables the state to derive opinions and solutions for problems than those that exist in the status quo. And we talk about how prioritizing provides a holistic identity for the state. In the beginning, we recognize the problems this post-colonial states face. We recognize the problem of underdevelopment, the problem of weak political system, how they lack an identity of their own. Now, what side opposition is proposing is the status quo. And what has the status quo done to this post-colonial government? Because in the status quo, the research academic works that is done by the majority is being prioritized over the minority. And so these governments are still developing, and these governments are nowhere near development. These governments are still facing the problems of weak political system. These governments are still facing the problem of identity. These governments are still facing the problems of dependence on their colonial masters. So therefore, the status quo is really not providing a solution to the problem. That is the reason why we as a side propagate a different way of doing this. I'll take you now. Now, we want to give a clear understanding on what minority and majority is. Now, the minority in the country does not really pertain to the population of the country, because there can be a case whereby the minority actually constitutes a vast percentage of the country. And we gave you evidence to prove this. About 5% of women are minorities, and they are found in the informal sectors. Now, for a government to be able to improve, the government needs to tap into the informal sector to be able to make good use of it. We've shown you in our first speech how these informal sectors are not touched because these people feel that they are not being catered for, and therefore they do not really care about the government and the ways of the government. This brings about a lot of violence. This brings about a lot of riots. And this is not just stating it. We have facts to back it up. We see that in South Africa, there are 80.9% Black Africans and 7.8% are white. This shows you that the minority, which is the Black Africans, are more in populations than the majority or the dominant group, which is the white. But 67% of the management position in South Africa belongs to the white and 14.3% to Black Africans. For this reason, there are a lot of riots and there are a lot of disturbances and the issues of violence in this kind of countries. We have shown you that. Now, they come to talk about for what reason are people more likely to listen to the majority. I asked the POI on that, and they said that people are more likely to listen to, and I put, people are more likely to listen to someone who is making sense. This does not make sense in any way. We do not understand what our opponent is trying to seek here. If they are trying to seek that the majority or the dominant group naturally make more sense than the minority, and we as a side do not believe so, because as the minorities already have the skill to be able to undergo this academic research, and what is needed is just funding. That's the reason why we will prioritize the minorities. Therefore, we do not agree to what they say that people are more likely to listen to people who are making sense. If people are more likely to listen to people who are making sense, then the minority is making sense, the majority is making sense, everyone is making sense. Therefore, it breaches its relevance. I'll take your POI now. I'll take your POI.
Sorry, Speaker, you continue to talk about how we've said we're gonna prioritize majority, but continuously your side is the one who is assuming that that's what we're saying, and we've continuously told you that that's not what we're saying. So if anything, you guys are the ones saying that majority is the one who makes sense. And so please tell us where exactly we said we're gonna prioritize majority and we're gonna stick to status quo, because I don't remember.
In the first speech, you clearly give the understanding that the majority should be prioritized. But then let's take you at your best, and let's take it that you never said that. You clearly stated that the funding should be because of skill. And we have clearly shown you how the minorities already have the skills and they need the funding, because these academic research per the motion are already being conducted, and the necessity here is about funding and priority. That is what we as a side are establishing. So if we are to take you even at your best, you still do not show us how these minorities do not really have the skill. You do not show us on your side. Now, your side, the first speaker clearly states in his statement, and I quote, we do not see how this solves the issues of sexism. They come to talk about how our side is not able to show the exclusivity of the benefits to us alone. We've shown you that these minorities have a lot of opinions that are not looked under. And an example is sexism. We do not give sexism as the only example, and we do not give sexism as the only thing that minorities are facing. Minorities are facing a lot of problems, such as not being a priority in the country and not being looked under. What are the characteristics of these post-colonial states? We see that in post-colonial states, we have their dominant group occupying elite positions. We can give you an example to back this. If you look at Indonesia as a case study, most of their presidents are either Javanese, Sudanese, or Madanese. These are the dominant group. If you look at Nigeria, most of their presidents or most people who occupy elite spaces are either Yoruba, Hausa, or Igbo. This shows you that these elite people in the dominant group, are from these ethnic species that are recognized in the country. Another thing is that they talk about how not prioritizing them doesn't mean that they are getting less. And that's the POI I asked. What is the current status quo? What is the current situation? The current situation is that these dominant groups are already in position. What you are propagating is already existing in the status quo, and that is what is happening. And it is not doing any good for these developing countries, in the sense that these developing countries are still underdeveloped. They still have weak political system, and they are still dependent on their colonial masters. Their economies are largely informal and unstable. Because of how their economics are largely informal, it is a necessity that they tap into the informal sector. And we realize that the informal sector is mostly comprising of the minority. And for this reason, we show you the relation between the minority and development in the country. Of course, the motion is not entirely centered on the minority. It's also centered on post-colonial states. And then the issue or the burden on both sides to prove is the relation between the minorities and these post-colonial states. We have done that exclusively on our side by showing you how funding or prioritizing the minorities will bring a lot of benefit exclusively than prioritizing or funding because of skill. In the end, each and every single part has skill. Thank you.
We're deeply grateful to third proposition for that contribution to this debate. Let's ask that opposition to close the substantiates. That opposition. Third opposition, are you here?
Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yep. Yes, you're audible.
And visible. Am I visible? Sir?
Sorry?
Okay, can you see me?
Yep.
Alright, cool. Yes, let me just get my timer ready. Alright, cool. I can't seem to find my timer, so I'll just rely on the text space. Alright. I'm going to start in the next 5 seconds. No prepared gender pronoun. Pure is just unmute. Say it once and I'll definitely take you. Don't worry. Once you say it, I will literally take note of that. Chair, please, when 1 minute is left, please just unmute and tell me that 1 minute is left. I'm going to start in the next 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. 2 things we tell you from the beginning of our entire case. 1, our counter proposition is that we want to prioritize the majority. We told you this is an actor's motion, so it literally means whatever we want to prioritize should be within the best interest of the post-colonial state. And we want to prioritize things where there's skill, where there's advanced level of knowledge, but most importantly, where that research, most importantly, is one that is so important. It means in the vast majority, whatever you got from the third speech is totally a straw manning of our case, because we still get a form of representation from the minority and the majority. Because if those minorities still are going to give us research that makes sense, obviously, research that makes sense, research that has skill, obviously, we're going to prioritize it in the long run. Why is this specifically true in our case? Because what we're telling you is that individuals who exist in status quo, if that ideas of exactly the research they're giving us is one that we think literally needs to be implemented within that post-colonial state because of the type of resources they don't have, because of the type of development and growth that they literally want in the long run. It is that we don't think we should like literally base specifically on a specific type of group because you're a minority. We should give it to you because you have been degraded by the system itself. Within that pattern in itself, are we literally going to get the best maximum impact that we want in our world? Something that they even literally engaged in within the entirety of their case. The first argument we get from them is that they want to help in the development of the state because there's a colonial state as a whole enables the majority to capture the perspective view of the minority group, which is basically true. Yes, we want that majority view to be captured and literally enable that development in the long run. But you're not going specifically just going to get development by just literally having, because you're a minority, you want to literally bring prioritized in the long run. Development only comes when you literally identify the same type of traits and the same type of downgrading that this society literally has in the long run. Munyaradzi clearly tells you 4 things of exactly why we think academic research literally exists within this way and why we're going to prioritize it within the impact of the post-colonial state. The first thing that she tells you is the nature of these post-colonial states, and secondly, the ideas of exactly what academic research literally looks like and how it can be influenced in helping these post-colonial states. But thirdly, how most important when it comes to skill and advanced levels of knowledge and sense itself is one that can literally give us this form of development in the long run. Because opening propositions, ideas based specifically on how they want minority development, we tell you we still get it on our side. But most importantly, even if like we buy their word at base and we literally are not going to giving a minorities anything, right? We think a world where we prioritize something that is going to develop that nation, we think minorities suffering in a nation that is developed is better than suffering them in a nation that is undeveloped in the long run. So we still get the best of their world that they're saying, trying to say that we don't have. Development still exists on our world, but on our world, it exists on a fair basic view because specifically the type of competence that they literally denote from the second speech is something that we have, but that competence itself is backed up with impact of the society itself in terms of exactly how the actor is going to be benefited in the long run. So we don't really think there's any ideas of exactly how they get this form of development at all. Second thing is prioritizing like provides holistic identities in the ethnic group for the state itself, right? Okay, cool. So let's use logic and sense, right? In the case that you clearly get from like the second speech in terms of like the representation of the country on the international fund will be harmed by this kind of policy being implemented, right? So you have identity, you have ethnic groups like you have these minority groups literally being implemented and literally being funded in the long run. So you tell me that the research that they're going to be giving from each and every minority that you want to prioritize itself is going to outweigh the skills that we literally have in status quo. How exactly do you think the identity of them is not going to be harmed in the long run? Because understand that post-colonial state now identifies under the umbrella bracket of those minorities that you're talking about. So in the vast majority, what you get from whom now makes sense of exactly how we're going to harm them on the international market, because this type of nation is one that is not prioritizing things that can make them grow, things that can give them utility, things that can give them sustainability, but it's things that is literally giving them like that ideas of exactly how you harm that, because it's based specifically on how you're just giving them, because it's just a certain type of group. So you don't really have the ideas of exactly how they're going to have holistic identities in the ethnic groups. Even if they do have these identities are more likely going to be harmed because they're not impacting society in something that is sustainable or utilized in the long run, right? So we don't really think we can give them the benefit of doubt for this argument. But even if you buy into their word and you give them this type of identity, right, you're more likely going to harm their type of representation and recognition, because most importantly, when they're now the face of the nation or they're now the face of development itself, they're more likely going to hear that ideas of exactly the type of backlash that now exists within that post-colonial state, because you haven't given them, like, you're just giving them this funding because they're minorities but not based on skill, which is problematic in the long run. It's more likely going to harm their identity. So you don't see exactly how you're going to get that form of identity representation that you literally want from them in the long run. But thirdly, it helps them derive solutions that exist in status quo already. But before we take down this idea, let's simply take that POI. Go ahead.
Your side talks about funding because of skill. In the motion, it clearly states how these minorities have already been conducting this academic researches, therefore they already have the skill. So you are buying on our side indirectly.
Do you know what? I'm conducting a research at the moment, and that research clearly doesn't make sense at all. It's an academic research that I'm conducting. Why am I not getting funding? Because it doesn't have any form of skill at all. You conducting an academic research does not necessarily equate for you to having skill, being advanced. It only equates for you like making something that has been nuanced. As for example, Munya already tells you that like someone might be like researching on Mr. John X that have been existing within the past. But those things are not something that is going to impact within the post-colonial state. We already told you this is an actors debate. You need to understand what's in the best interest of the actors itself, right? Our word then gives you the best of your word and the best of our word, because we literally don't like segregate, or we don't like literally discriminate anyone, because what we tell you from our side is that we just want to be based on skill. If those minorities are going to be having skill, if that majority is going to be having skill, fund them. Why should you not fund them? Because literally they do have that skill in the long run. So thirdly, it helps the state derive solutions that already exist in status quo. That was the last argument we get specifically from them, right? Why do we think this is specifically flawed and why is it wrong, right? Momo tells us exactly how it is going to increase tension within like that certain type of state, and most importantly, the ideas of exactly competence not being fulfilled, right? Something that like literally was like screamed out within the entirety of our arguments. Why we think it's wrong, right? We think when you're literally conducting everything from a minority perspective view, it literally means that the solution that you're going to be deriving are from those minorities only. But even if it's not from those minorities, right, there is a lot of problems that exist in a post-colonial state. That nature itself that you get from the first speaker is very, very important. Those problems can never literally be just like implemented by you just having funding minorities only. What can only save us, what can only give us growth, what can only give us impact, what can only give us that development that they're still crying for, is when we decide to understand what skill looks like and what skill is all about. the solutions you speak of can only exist in our world, because those solutions that exist in status quo, when you prioritize skill itself, it's more likely going to help us derive those type of problems and eliminate and eradicate those type of problems that exist and give us solutions. Your world only gives us the idea of exactly that we just want to prioritize this group because it's a group that has been segregated by history. What we tell you is that even if they are groups that are not segregated by history, or even if they are groups segregated by history, let's prioritize them, considering that they have higher levels of skill, considering that they have higher levels of advanced, I don't know, IQ or whatsoever. That's what clearly we tell you, and with this proportion is entirely out of the debate. Why does opposition easily take this debate? Firstly, our counterprop is just telling you exactly how we need to prioritize funding based specifically on the skill, based specifically on what that post state literally looks like, which is within the best interest and incentive of the actor. But most importantly, it then takes away, it then literally save us the characteristics of what a post-colonial state looks like. Secondly, we tell about exactly what the nature of the post-colonial state looks like, and what prioritizing is more likely to give us better ways in helping the actor and impacting them in the long run. Thirdly, what are the goals of the post-colonial state, and exactly how are we more likely going to get them in our world? But most importantly, they're listening in what is it time?
Yep, and I'm very sorry for not informing you that you have a minute left. Very, very sorry.
Okay. Proud to oppose.
We are deeply grateful to third opposition for their contribution to this debate, and everyone insofar as the substantives are concerned. We now move on to the reply speeches, with opposition replying first. Over to you, Munesushe. Yes, you are.
Funding. We're saying that the people with the highest level of skill, highest level of potential are the people who are going to get the funding. And so they've been rebutting a case that we haven't even been arguing. And even in that kind of case, we still show you how our world is still better for the actor in this motion, which are these post-colonial states. But lastly, and mostly, they have completely ignored our actor, which are these post-colonial states. Whereas we have shown you how we are better, not only for the post-colonial states, but for these minorities who they are valuing so much. And then onto our clashes. So I see three main clashes in this debate. The first one being a clash of representation. They continue to tell us that we're going to get more representation on their side. However, on their side, we actually get less representation, because on their side, we are funding people based on the fact that they're a minority, not on the fact that they're skilled. And so the probability that people are going to listen to anything that their research has to say is very low. This is something that we bring to you, and this is something that is left unengaged. Secondly, we talk of the clash of minority. Who is better for these minorities? We tell you that on our side of the house, we are still funding these minorities. We're only funding them when they deserve it. The only kind of rebuttal we get to this is, oh no, they're already skilled. However, as we stated before, being skilled, conducting research doesn't mean that that's the best possible research that could be there in time. And so we see that that argument also still stands, as we show you how on our side of the house, we better accommodate these minorities. Not only that, we better accommodate them because we make sure that internationally we are recognized and we get more funded
is investing into the country. And so these minorities have a higher chance of being funded by the government because the government will have more money as a result of the up to standard research that we would have funded. But lastly, on the whole clash of development, we told you that we actually developed these post-colonial states even more. And the only reputation they get, the only reputation we get from their side is the fact that no, we shut down the ideologies from these minorities, and that's the kind of development we need. Okay, how exactly are you going to be fighting for sexism if you don't even have food on your table because your government can't produce that, because your economy is suffering, because you have chosen to put in money into research that is not actually going to benefit the country? We tell you that outside of the house, we put in money into research that we know is going to benefit our state and that we know is going to be helpful to our state as a whole. And now we go into our best case versus worst case. We take them in their best case. Let's say, okay, these minorities are funded. We say, okay, these ideologies are put into the public. Let's say it's a woman fighting for things like misogyny. We see that this is put up into the public. However, because this woman has been given this funding only because she's a minority, people are not likely to listen to her. She's actually likely to get backlash because she hasn't gotten this funding because she deserves it. She's gotten it just because she's a minority. But furthermore, we see that because of the standard of the living, or the standard of this kind of research, academic research that has been run, this woman is likely to have done research that is probably not up to par and probably won't be able to explore the ideology to the best of their ability. And so, in their best case, even, we still have the problems that we've pointed out. We take that in our worst case. In our worst case, okay, let's say some of these ideologies are not actually represented. We see that outside of the house, we actually do make sure that these ideologies are represented to the best kind of standard. But even if they aren't represented, we see that we still live in a better world. Why? Because these countries, these states actually get to develop. Because they get to develop, we see that it's easier for these states to be able to fund other researchers that are going to spread these messages even more. So on our side of the house, still though, we still get that representation of minority, but we also make sure that the actor in this motion is supported, as we've never been proud to stand against the motion that is so discriminatory, but states that they're not. Thank you.
Just a gentle reminder for the next set of rounds that anything post 4 minutes 15 seconds or 8 minutes 15 seconds is not credited by the adjudicators. We're deeply grateful to the opposition bench as a whole for their contribution to this debate. Let's have proposition 1 to reply on behalf of the opposition.
I'll be beginning my speech soon. I'm setting my timer. I'll be beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, what have we brought to this debate? We first proved that research done by minority work groups should be prioritized because they help in the development of the post-colonial state as a whole. How? Because they are able to capture the perspective of the minority, therefore avoiding feelings of apathy by the minority, who most of the time constitute, especially in the case of women, constitutes majority numerically. We also prove that it helps government to maximize potential for development, which our opposition clearly fails to realize, because if minority views are considered, that it gives an inch of including them in the it gives them the edge of including everybody inside government, and it helps states develop, which is like the primary aim of every post-colonial state. They raise up issues that we as a side would prioritize minorities just because they are minorities, and that their research wouldn't classify under skill. And we feel this is a misunderstanding of the motion, because it said it will prioritize research work already conducted by them. And I don't feel like the state wouldn't recognize these academic researches if they weren't skilled, if the people conducting it weren't skilled, and it didn't bring to light problems existing already in the post-colonial states and didn't raise up solutions. We also brought to the argument that it helps states, we brought to your view that it helps states derive solutions to problems that already exist in status quo, which is the primary, which helps the post-colonial states because they don't get just the majority view. The majority view is already represented in government because a huge number of people in majority are elected representatives and they stand already in government. And as I stated earlier in my speech as first speaker, that most of the majority constitutes parliamentary seats. They have jobs and are in high position. So therefore, we believe that argument is rendered flawed and that I've spoken on the issue of development because we proved how it would boost in development and prevent feelings of apathy. And then we believe that as a side, Opp actually agreed with that because he said, because the best of your world is in the best of our world. That's indirectly buying into our argument that yes, minority views should be prioritized over majority. And here in the motion, it's not saying that the majority would be overlooked because, as I stated earlier, they constitute a whole bunch of high-standing positions in government, but they would prioritize the views of the smaller piece of people. Then we said we brought that prioritizing provides holistic identity. It creates a sense of cohesion. Everybody knows they are contributing to national development, which is the main aim of post-colonial systems. That's why we stand to propose this motion. Thank you.
I'm deeply grateful to the speaker and the whole proposition bench for their engagement in the debate. Thank you everyone for what was a fantastic set round of ASDC 2022. What's going to happen now is the panel is going to take the next 15 to 20 minutes to come up with a decision, and we'll be back at 1:30. In the meantime, everyone can just sit still here and have a chat about the debate. Please don't go anywhere far so that it's easier for us to contact you back when you already have the result. Thank you and all the best. Can the panelists please join me in the deliberation room?
Thank you guys for that debate. It was really enjoyable.